All right, Jim, what's going on, man? It's nice to finally be on here with you. How you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, I'm excited to finally have you on. Jim is a legend in the Salesforce Discord, and so I was
Take it.
excited to yeah, take it, man, take it. You deserve it. I was excited to grab him and just kind of pick his brain a little bit about the junior dev process and what that whole thing looks like. So I'd love to kind of jump into that. But before we do that, man, I just want to know a little bit about you. So, like, tell us a little bit about yourself, like how you got started with Salesforce, what you do currently, all that stuff. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, so actually I went to Purdue for a computer graphics degree, which is kind of graphics and programming. Started a company that I ran the Purdue incubator for a couple of years. And then back in 2012, started this consultancy to kind of help other companies do the same thing, grow and scale with software and business automation. So just kind of fell in love with that and the whole marriage between software and technology, but also making a business better, automating it, improving it, making more money.
Right.
Combining those two worlds together, it's kind of really been my passion. So we were been around since 2012, and now we're up to 8 to 10 people, depending on how you count it. And we're just really focused on really end-to-end integration in Salesforce solutions. So everything from that web lead, clicking on a Google ad, all the way through to your accounting system and tying all that together.
Amazing, man. Amazing. And so, so how did you get involved with Salesforce in the first place? Like, how'd you find out about it? Was it back in college, or you said Purdue? I'm sorry. So, yeah, like, was it back in those times, or what was that?
Yeah,
like?
we started our first company, me and a couple of buddies, and we needed a way to reach out to all these customers and get a hold of these people at these big corporations in the life sciences world. And so we actually started looking at Salesforce. We were using that some. We also ended up using Sugar CRM some, which is kind of a blast from the past.
Okay.
But we were using that to just build a big database, and we were scraping a bunch of information, building a big database, and then we were just going through that database, and we were dialing for dollars, and we were calling people, emailing, campaigns back then, and that's how we survived, and that's how we kind of got through on the marketing sales side, because we didn't have a lot of resources. So we just kind of saw that you could act a lot bigger than you were if you used the right tools. And so we just kind of kept applying that to larger and larger clients now with our consultancy to help other people do the same thing.
That's super cool, man. That's super awesome. So you hustled. That's how you got started. Yeah. Yep. That's awesome. So, like, what does a day in the life look like for you?
Oh, for me personally, man, it's pretty intense. But we're doing everything from, I have a lot of meetings. This is like my 7th meeting today. And so as we go on, wow, and we say, hey, how do we analyze a business process? How do we define key metrics and goals? How do we go through and say, okay, if we automate your business in Salesforce, what are you going to get out of it? Right? Like, right. What ROI are you going to get? How are we going to help you make more money? If we help our clients make more money, then they just keep wanting to work with us because we're not a cost anymore. We're a profit center, right? So we're actually helping them grow their business, grow their profit margin, scale up. So a lot of what we're doing is working with those companies in those meetings, really defining their business process, really defining what they want to get out of it, and then translating that into how are we going to do that in Salesforce? Are we going to use declarative tools? Are we going to use the development tools? Who on our team is going to do that? How do we project plan that out? How do we actually execute it, get it into production, and then, actually maintain that and support our clients? So today, a lot of what I'm doing is on those strategy architecture calls. I'm still doing a little bit of development, if it makes sense. Okay. It makes sense less and less for me to be writing code as we have more people on the team, and also getting into other configuration situations and everything.
Yeah, I love that about like CEOs like you, man, who aren't afraid to make it happen, like jump in. And I know that there's sort of a aspect of that when you're building, and it kind of just has to happen. Like you just wear a lot of hats, but that's super rad that you're still in the day-to-day, grinding of making it happen, man. That's rad.
Yeah.
Yes. So, okay. So, everyone on here, they're generally, know what they're doing. They're amazing. They've been at this thing for a long time. But you know what I want to hear? I want to hear about a time you messed up at work. Like maybe you completely broke someone's a CR like Salesforce instance or something like that. Yeah, tell us about that. How would that go?
I've never done that, so I wouldn't know.
Oh,
I don't know, man. Like, it seems like those data load jobs. So we have a lot of clients where acquisitions and they acquire another company, and we have to do a large data load migration and getting that in. And that's kind of one of those touchy things where you just want to make sure you've got repeatability. And we kind of went in and got that data into their production org, and you kind of get that in. You start looking at it, and you say, is this exactly what I needed? And those are some of those freak out moments, right? Where you kind of just hanging out, all day and all night trying to get that done. And so we've learned a lot of lessons from those things. And we kind of said, okay, right. how do we make sure we do data loads properly? And so we actually started doing it all with the SFDX and the CLI and upserts. So you could use external IDs and you could make sure you could just hit a button and redo it, right? And then you could hit a button and redo it. So if we need to do some edits, we've also tried to get into doing a lot of the data manipulation where it's repeatable in Excel or whatever. So that way we can follow the steps from the original clean data through our transformation into our load and make sure that's all done properly. So we had some of those issues. And then there's always the fun, you deployed some code to prod and it looks good. And
right.
Some user and some other random profile or some didn't have some permission. And
you're right.
It's 8 a.m. the next day. They're like, it's broken. Right. And you have to like hot fix that and roll that back. So we've also done a lot on that side as well. With tools like GearSet and other things where we can really easily roll something back in the off chance that we did miss something. And so it's just, you just take those mistakes, right? And you try to mitigate them as much as possible so you don't ever do them again.
Yeah. When I first got started with technology, I completely deleted I went in through the email settings and I completely wiped everyone's past emails, everything they've ever had saved. Like it was like a brand new email thing. I was like, I'm getting fired, man. Like I was so scared. Yeah. That's awesome. But yeah, I've totally been there with you, man. I know how that feels. So junior devs, hey, people that are just getting started in Salesforce, like, calm down a little bit. We've all been there. So just some things about you, man. Like I'd love to know. So like just to get to know you a little bit more. Like if you were able to choose someone from history, like any person at any point in time, like to grab a cup of coffee with or maybe a beer with, like who would that be for you?
Oh, I don't know, man. There's both people on like the business side and the technology side. I mean, on the business side, like Rockefeller kind of did a lot of really interesting things,
right?
In philanthropy, and not only built an enterprise, but he made the society better, with some of those things. So that's kind of interesting.
That's cool.
People like that have done both on the business side. Or Drucker does really awesome research, and all this stuff from the 70s and 80s is still just as perfectly applicable today as it was back then. But then on the tech side, obviously Bill Gates would be awesome. Just hang out with him and kind of talk to him and see what he thinks and kind of where he sees the world going.
That's super cool, man. So, I totally. That's an interesting question, and that's really rad. I think on the technology side, I'd also choose Gates. I love like the philanthropy stuff, like you were talking about, like what he's doing in the company. I mean, what he's doing in the world. He's like obliterating Ebola, I think it is, in Africa and all that stuff. That's super rad. So cool, man. So I want to chat with you a little bit about landing a new gig. Like, so if someone wants to come into the Salesforce ecospace, it's tough. It seems like, it's so niche. Not a lot of people even know that this exists, this career path. And it seems even an extra step harder to step into. And so I kind of want to ask you a bunch of questions around landing that job. So what do you think are some pathways people can try and land a job in Salesforce, maybe without having any experience? Like, what's that first step into the ecosystem look like?
Yeah, and so we've been involved in like the Salesforce Pathfinder program that's here in Indianapolis, and I think they've expanded now to other cities, but they have programs that help you make that transition. It's like a 6-week intensive program where you try to get your first certification, right? So their whole thing is we're going to teach you enough to get a certification. You get that first admin cert or that first dev cert, and then you've got kind of just enough, you're still kind of wet behind the ears, and it's kind of like, well, where do you go from there? And if you're going with that little bit of experience and you want to get a Salesforce job, the easiest thing is probably go to a really big firm. that's big enough to get you in on, like, they're going to train you up for a couple months before you even work with the client. You know, some of the larger
Hmm.
consultancies who have lots of staff, that's probably going to be your easiest way to get in. But what I see too, that I give people a lot of advice is don't go for a job where Salesforce is in the title necessarily. Go for a job like sales ops or rev ops or any of these kind of like other ancillary positions where
Right.
you're going to be doing Salesforce. Like Salesforce is in the job description as something you need to be working on. You need to have that experience, but your title isn't Salesforce admin or Salesforce developer because you don't have enough experience to say you are either of those things.
Right.
So if there's more like a junior dev, like a web dev, and you've got some JavaScript background, or you have the Lightning Web Component like Super Badge and JavaScript Specialist certification, this is going to help you because it helps the employer know that you're competent enough. You can self learn, you can problem solve, and you've got those base foundations. But trying to be like the only Salesforce developer at a small company that only
Yeah.
needs one Salesforce developer, it's going to be really hard for them to justify hiring you, or the only Salesforce admin. You want to find a bigger team that you can be a part of.
Right, right, right. That's great advice. Great advice. I love that idea of looking for roles around Salesforce that aren't directly Salesforce. That's genius. So you're going back to like your first job search, man, and it sounds like you're pretty entrepreneurial. And so maybe this doesn't quite apply to you, but you're going back to your first job search. What advice? Maybe you're about to land your first role in Salesforce. Like, what advice would you give yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think with that, it would kind of be those things. It'd be like skill up on the certs and skill up on any other kind of example work. If you're on the dev side, the public GitHub repo is huge to have public repo
Hmm.
projects and what's going on there to show that you're competent on those things. I also wouldn't discount communication. Like we're looking for people who can communicate well. We're looking for good problem solvers. We're looking for good
Right.
self-starters. There's a lot of soft skills as well. So it's not just you got a GitHub repo and you've got a cert, or you're an admin, you have some sales background, you got a cert. There's a lot more of that. What have you been doing, right? So I would try to focus on those things on my resume, focus on those other soft skills as well. So when I'm in an interview, that you can really kind of command the situation, show how you can solve problems, show how you can think analytically. Make sure you're asking a lot of questions back to them, like you're really engaged and interested, and you understand what they're
Yeah.
talking about. All those things would be really, really important to me. And then, casting a wide net as possible. You mentioned Discord. There's always job offers and, posts on there, and advice. You can get advice on there. But there's also things
Right.
like looking Indeed alerts, LinkedIn. There's a lot of places. There's also a lot of niche Salesforce recruiting groups, which may be a good path when you're trying to get your first job, because they can go out and they can hunt for those jobs for you.
Yeah. Yeah. All super, super great advice. Let me ask you a question. So, like, when you're sitting in front of a candidate, you've done a bunch of interviews, right? I know you've done a bunch of them. And so, you're sitting in front of a candidate. What do you feel like certs versus experience? Like, how does that play out in your mind?
Yeah, so I think unless you're a consultancy, most people don't care about certs. Like, I mean, like certs are important, but they're not like what's going to get you a job. They might get you past HR, right? It might get you past that first screen before you have a conversation. But then as soon as you have your first conversation, it's more about what do you know, what have you
Right.
done, and how do you handle ambiguity, right? I've been using the platform since 2003, 2004, and I still have to look stuff up. I still have to figure out how it works. I still got to read the release notes. So a lot of times it's, I don't know, I've never done it before, and how am I going to still do my job and solve this problem? And so if you can help people be confident that you're a problem solver, and it doesn't matter what the problem is, you're going to take it and you're going to tackle it. I think that's really important as well on that side. So those things we're kind of looking at to see, are you a good communicator? Are you a good problem solver? Do you have those other skills? Can you learn what you don't know? But on the experience side, right? Like if you've already done the exact same types of things that we do a lot of finance integrations. If you've already done a lot of NetSuite and QuickBooks Online integrations, as an admin or a dev, we're like, hey, you already know what we need you to know from a business
Right.
process standpoint as well. The other thing I think people really discount on that experience is they want it to be all Salesforce experience or all dev experience, but it's not. It's how does a business process a credit card transaction, and how do you get that information into Salesforce and then get it into an accounting system? Or how does a customer
Mm.
log in and complain about something that's broken? And how do you go through that process and that step? So we look a lot for people who understand business as well as technology and kind of help marry the two
Right.
together as consultants. So I think there's also that balance there, right? In your experience, it's not just technical experience, unless you're on a big team. If you're on a big team, then they might just care that you just have dev experience and that's it. But for us, you got to do both.
Right. No, that was gold right there for anyone who's listening, about like, understanding the entire business process to see how you can best serve them, using the tool of Salesforce. And that's super valuable. And I find myself learning more and more about that each and every day. Just, we're doing finance stuff too. And so I'm like, why do I need, like, what's the purpose of this? Like, if I understand the purpose, I can more confidently build something that solves the need. Yeah. So gold, absolute gold there. So, speaking of Salesforce developers, do you think that like developers should, or even admins too, like, should they specialize like in one niche, like LWCs is my niche, or maybe CPQ, like doing admin works, with CPQ products, like is that their niche, or is it better to be a generalist where you kind of study the whole thing?
Yeah, so I haven't seen a lot of companies that have large teams. So even large enterprises on Salesforce, Fortune 50 companies, if you want to work in-house at a large company or a small company, the team is still going to be pretty small. It's going to be like a couple people, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
not going to be 20 people. It's not going to be 50
Mm-hmm.
people. So you're going to have to do a lot of different things. If you want to be a specialist on one thing, then you probably, my gut feeling is you probably have to go to a large consultancy. Like you're going to have to go to like a Big Four. You're going to have to go to like a Salesforce specialty consultancy where they're big enough that they're going to just bring you in and out of a million projects to do just your part. But for the most part, if you're going to work in-house or at a smaller consultancy, then you gotta know how to do a little bit of everything. We absolutely look for people who know Lightning Web Components and VF, and maybe they know Aura a little bit, although we'd all like to maybe skip over that chapter. Just, well, it was a good stepping stone, but
It was.
right now you don't really support it, right? Usually your VF or your LWC, or you're migrating something from Aura to LWC. But looking at those things and also looking at Apex in general, right? We're not to a point where we're going to have front end and back end Salesforce developers. That's where
Right.
Salesforce is kind of going with all this Lightning Web Components and JavaScript.
Right.
So you could probably focus on just LWC versus just server side at a slightly larger organization, but most people I see have to deal with both.
Yeah. Okay. That's great advice. Great advice. So let's talk about landing jobs, right? Like, I mean, we've been kind of chatting about that, but like, have you seen anyone, like, name one thing, if this applies to you, name one thing you've seen that like was out of the ordinary that someone did to land a job, and maybe one time someone did something out of the ordinary that totally tanked, like totally failed.
I don't know if I've had somebody that's something out of the ordinary that's totally failed. I think the big key theme is like persistence and like
Okay.
interest. Like if you're really like if you're really persistent and you're really like strong-willed and you can command a conversation, not like being
Mm-hmm.
aggressive, but being assertive and kind of commanding, um, that goes a long way to say, hey, this person's really interested. And also they know how to hold a conversation. They know how to push a conversation in the direction they want it to go. So sometimes just those soft skills are really impressive if people kind of come out of the gate strong on that. As far as something that somebody's done like really out of the box that's gone wrong, we kind of get just the standard stuff. The main issue is people just go on Indeed and go wherever and they just throw resumes at us, no
Right.
cover letter. They don't fill out our survey. They don't like put any detail in there, and those people kind of get glossed over. And then whoever's
Mm-hmm.
persistent and we feel like we can trust, then we kind of keep digging in on those people. So just make sure that you're going to go after the jobs you actually want and focus on them hard. And you can bug them, and if they've got an email address, and you can bug them and see what's going on, and keep persistent after them. I think persistence wins out.
Right. Yeah. I'm totally with you. So like, if someone's sitting in an interview with you, like what are the questions that you're like that they can just really answer to really help convince you they're a great candidate? Like, so what are the questions maybe in your head that you're like, this, I need to know that they can, X, Y, and Z. Do you have those?
Yeah, so it depends on the scenario, but I might throw weird stuff out at them, like weird business scenarios. I might throw out like, if a customer has opportunities and they have opportunity items and now they're like, hey, I want to do commission. Like, what do you do? With no other details. Because a lot of times business users and customers don't give you the details. You need to pull the details from
Hmm.
them. So we kind of look at that to say, can you tease out a solution from like two sentences? Like, oh, hey, we want to do commission. Well, where do you start, right? Like,
Right.
what do you ask? What do you have to know? What do you detail out in order to understand if they understand that concept? And then on the dev side, it'd be a lot more the same thing on, with lighting web components. So they'll ask questions around like, hey, I want a component that we can edit a bunch of lines, and then as soon as we edit those line items, somewhere else on the page, a bunch of numbers, calculate automatically to show us our total. How would you build that? But I also want the standard related lists on the page to refresh as well, which is really hard / impossible to do sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just kind of those curveballs are like in the deep end of like a solution where you say, well, you might have to use Lightning messaging service to, talk to, the platform and get rid of the cache and refresh, make sure the related list refresh, and just see if they know those types of quirky details
Okay.
off the bat to see if they've already got burned, right? And that goes back to the experience platform. A lot of
Right.
experiences is you've already done it once, it didn't work out, you did it twice, you did it 5 times, and finally the 6th time it worked, and you're going to remember that. And so
Hmm.
getting into those details to try to see what people know about the platform, but as well as how do they handle ambiguity, how do they do project management, how do they take a task, even if you're a developer, you might get a task that's half baked, and what do you do with that information? How do you push back on that? How do you get the rest of the information you need to be successful? So a lot of that communication back and forth is really important to look at as well.
Yeah. 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 That's awesome. Let's talk about resumes for a second. What do you love to see on resumes? Like,
Yeah, so I mean, I like, if they got the certs, I like the certs. I like some people do the graphics where they have like the graphics of all the certs that they have. It makes it a really Salesforce specific resume, right?
hmm.
I don't like stuff on a resume that's like unrelated past job experience that's really recent. Like if your prior job was in a completely unrelated industry, you have no tech experience, you have no PM experience, you have no sales experience, and you're like, I want to be a Salesforce admin. I got a cert online. It's not going to happen. The best thing for you to do there is get a little bit of sales experience, and then do sales ops, where you're basically everyone else's assistant, keeping Salesforce clean, which then turns you into the admin, and then kind of turns you. So it's more like career trajectory, right? You really want to see that story that you're technical, you're business focused, you have experience on both of those sides, or at least one of them, right? That you've got that in the background. So anything you could do to say, I managed people, or I project managed, or I know agile, or if you take those jobs that seem unrelated, like you worked at a restaurant, well, if you worked at a restaurant, that might not be helpful unless you talk about how you were in charge of the schedule and scheduling issues, or payroll, or you were the manager, or you were the front of house manager, and you had to deal with all these issues and customer requests. That you can spin it into, how is that job relevant to what you have to do here with our company? So I
Totally.
really look at doing that as well. And you don't have to go to multiple pages, like all your history back to high school. It's just like, what have you been doing the last 5 years? Maybe the last 10 years. If you're straight out of college, right, then it's, what extracurriculars have you been doing? Do you have any projects you stood up? Did you do any with Salesforce? They have the nonprofit, where you can like
Hmm.
volunteer for nonprofits and kind of help out. Uh, so there's other areas you could kind of get involved, right? You could go to one of your local communities that uses Salesforce and help them a little bit and get your feet wet that way. So those are the
Right.
types of things that we're kind of look for and promote people to keep going after, is those kind of Salesforce adjacent jobs.
Yeah, that's a great concept. I'm gonna definitely talk about that a little bit. It's a great concept. What, like, so your opinion on beautiful resumes versus text resumes? Like, where do you stand on that?
Well, we're a small company, so if you send us a resume, we were going to read it, personally, unless, you don't get through our survey form, you don't fill out anything on the survey. Um, we always ask people if they're an MVP, and people are always like, yeah, I'm an MVP. And then you're like,
I don't think you are.
yeah. So So stuff like that, does your resume match, what you filled out in the survey form? Um, but then just kind of going through that and look at that. And if it's well designed, that's fine. But I want it to be cohesive. I want it to be, really well structured. It needs to make sense. I think business ROI too, right? Like our
Right.
clients don't care, like if you wrote the most beautiful, JavaScript ever, or you figured out how to do this, thing perfectly, and you use platform events, they care about you decreased the amount of time it takes to save an opportunity because their
Right.
old really was real garbage. They care about the fact that now they can add as many line items as they want without a system failure. So how is what you've done translate into business benefits, right? And even if you're working
Right.
in house, right? Like no big company that uses Salesforce is wanting to spend money on programming or customizing Salesforce. They're doing it because it makes them more money, right?
Hmm.
That's why they're doing it. So how do you help them make more money? How do you help whoever's going to hire you sleep well at night because they feel like you're a good problem solver and you'll own those challenges. So
Right.
again, it's a balance of like, yeah, experience, but what was the point of the experience? What was the business outcome? What were those things? Getting percentages on there, like decreased, bugs by whatever percent. In PMD, if you use PMD for code, you got rid of so many warnings and so many critical issues. Cut C time in
Yeah.
half, things like that actually translate.
Yeah, that's a great metric. To the PMD stuff is a great metric. I never thought about that.
I love it. We use it a lot for clients, so I love it.
Mm. Yeah, that's all. Yeah. What do you think the worst thing you've ever seen on a resume is?
Just like, just tons of typos and just like sloppy. Didn't even run it
Yeah.
through like Word or Google,
Yeah.
Docs to tell you what the typos are and clean it up and just stuff like that. Also, people who are just insanely underqualified given the job, description and the job requirements. As a small business, we need to hire people with certain experience, and we try to be pretty honest with the experience that we need and try to match that
Hmm.
up. And so if you've got no certs, you've got no experience, you have one certification, or maybe you don't have a certification, you have anything, you're like, well, I worked in sales or I did this. I mean, it's wasting our time and your time. Just don't bother, going after that job and just doing that shotgun approach. So I would just keep it tailored, keep it focused, actually make sure it's clean. Go send it to a couple of your friends, have them critique it,
Right.
tell you what's wrong with it, right? Make sure it looks good and reads good.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree. I heard that. Uh, oh, what was it? It was the number one thing that disqualifies all resumes is typos and grammatical errors. So it's pretty critical for
Yeah,
sure.
anybody who's actually using like a hiring software, a lot of those hiring softwares automatically kick out typos or knock scores off of it. So anyone bigger, yeah, you're never going to hear back if it's not perfect.
Right, right, right. So let's talk about growth heroes for a second. Like, what does your hiring process actually look like? Let's say, I put in an application. I've actually filled out the survey. My experience actually matches the survey, and so what's the next step?
Yeah, so we're going to use something like Calendly or whatever to go to all those people who get to that round and say, hey, pick a time slot to meet with us, and then we'll go through a quick interview, like a 30-minute interview that is kind of lighter, just to get a general sense of your experience. Have you done this? Have you done this? Like, have you done a classic to Lightning migration? We do a
Hmm.
lot of those. So if you haven't done one, there's a lot of issues with it. Have you done this? Have you done that? How much LWC have you done? How much of this have you done? Have you ever converted, VF into LWC? Some of those higher level things. If you're more on the project management consultant side, we're also going to ask things about project management and how you would do certain things in certain scenarios. And we're really just looking for, can we have a good conversation with you? And do you have some of that basic experience, and we're going to mark that all down and we score it, and we just put everybody in like in a spreadsheet and we score each person. We kind of look at that. And then that might take, a week or two, kind of depending on what's going on. And then after that couple weeks, then we'll schedule, 1 hour, sessions. We'll go more in depth. And that's, we'll kind of throw more of those curveballs. Like, how would you handle this weird scenario? right? How would you do this thing? And something that we know happens all the time, and you won't know the answer unless you've done it before because it's
Right.
not documented and it's not obvious, so we'll just kind of poke at you with those questions, right? And see how in depth you are. Now again, it just depends on the role. On the junior role, nobody's really gonna necessarily expect you to know all those things. And I
Right.
think the other key thing is just say, like, I don't know, I've never done that. Like, that's an okay answer. What's not an okay answer is, well, we did this one time, someone on the team did this. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter. I'm not hiring we, I'm hiring you. So you should be saying, I did this, or, I didn't do this directly, but someone on the team did it. I worked with them and it looks like this is how you would probably solve it.
Right.
Those are better answers. Not knowing everything is perfectly acceptable. So we'll look through that and we'll kind of get into that, and then we'll also talk with the candidates about our business, our culture, kind of what we care about around like mastery and transparency and like satisfying work, and integrity, and kind of the things that we try to bring to the table as a small boutique consultancy. Right? We're
Mm-hmm.
not we're not trying to grow like crazy. We're trying to hire the right people at the right time and make sure that we grow in a way that makes sense. And then we also want to say, well, what type of work do we want to do? And does this person also enjoy the type of work that we want to do? And would we enjoy working with them? So we'll go through some of those things in that second interview if we get to them. Otherwise, we'll go to a third one. We'll talk more about that fit, and we'll start talking about, comp and benefits and lifestyle and all those things. And just try to get a sense of if that person is excited and happy, about working with us. And if we're excited and happy about working with them, because at that point in time, you already kind of know if they're going to be okay or not. And then on the dev side, we also might do like a live coding or like show me some code and explain it to me. On the admin consulting side, we'll do more of, here's this weird scenario. I want you to write it down. I want to watch you document a business scenario, pretend like I'm a client, and walk through that kind of real world scenario, kind of like a whiteboarding session, just
Yeah.
to see how you think on your feet.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, it's kind of like, well, if we have the need and there's that good fit, then we're just going to try to get that job offer out and just bring you into the team and make sure it works out.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. That's perfect. So what, like in your hiring process, like what are some things that stick out in your mind that like have gotten people disqualified? Like maybe they've made it past. It doesn't have to be crazy stories, but even just maybe common things that you see, or we love crazy stories. So feel free.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't have a ton of crazy stories, but just really, really bad communication, really bad follow up, rescheduling the interviews a couple times. Like, don't reschedule interviews unless it's, a good reason. You get a pass, but if you keep rescheduling or showing up late, then it's like, okay, you're not punctual. So just issues like that, where it's kind of like,
Mhm.
come on, get with the program, be serious about it.
Right.
Those things, just sloppiness too. You're just kind of like what your environment is in. Right now, today, we're doing all of our interviews remote. We kind of do anyways because we're a 100% remote company. So we hire people all over the United States. So we're gonna interview you remote. So can you do that? Do you have a good workspace?
Right.
Do you have a quiet workspace? Kind of what does that look like as well? Because that's where you're going to be working. So those kind of other just kind of ancillary issues to try to say, is this going to be a good fit? Or are you going to deal with folks in our environment? But yeah, it's, short one word answers, well, how would you do this? Well, you got at least got to get
Trigger.
well, I don't
Yeah.
know, but what about this, or what about that, or I would go find this out, or I'd ask someone on the team, I'd figure
Exactly.
that out, yeah, keep that conversation going, don't be, you know, just kind of just sitting there not saying anything. So I think
Hmm.
how good that conversation goes. If you have noticed, I talk really fast. If you talk really slow, I talk really fast. It's kind of off. So how do we get that cadence? How do we sync up there as well? So just it's not that hard. To just have a good, decent, quality conversation. And if you have trouble with that, then that might be something you have to go out and
Totally.
do and practice in like social settings, right? And other things where you can get that experience talking to other people. Um, and that plus your experience, which is going to be obvious on the paper. So it's the conversation and it's the experience and background. Other than that, those are usually what kind of qualify or disqualify people out of our process. It's
Yeah.
never really like some crazy thing,
Sure, sure,
they
sure.
just flake out, or they're awesome. Sometimes they're awesome, and we're like, man, look, you're awesome, but we don't have quite the role for you, or you don't have quite the experience for us to. Sometimes another thing to keep in mind, things are competitive. You can't beat yourself up if you don't get a job because
Yeah.
it might not be the right fit. So what we try to do is we try to give people career advice and feedback. We say, hey, we didn't hire you,
That's
but
awesome.
these
That's
things are really
awesome.
good. I would recommend doing this. We try to give people that advice after the fact.
That's super helpful for people that are, yeah, in the middle of that job search and they like, I'm not getting hired. What's wrong? Super helpful.
Yeah.
Give me that breakdown in your head of personality versus skill set. Like, where does that also fit in? Like, when you're hiring a candidate, you're bringing them on.
I mean, it's both, right? It's and it's also kind of like on the personality side. I think that the thing you can't be missing is the ability to solve problems, right? You got to be able to like take some random thing, take something that's on fire, and solve that problem and get it done, And if you're on the consulting and admin side, you also have to be really good at communicating and really good at project
Right.
management and putting those things down. Right. A lot of what we do, especially as a remote company, it's all about documenting. It's all about putting it online. This is what we're going to do. Here's the problem. Here's the solution. Here's how we're going to QA it. Here's how we're going to deploy it. Here's what sandbox it's just a lot of details. It's a lot of, detailed management. So those things are more important, I'd say, than what you know. It's that you know how to work efficiently, and you know how to find the answer, and you're not afraid to go chase down a solution, right? Just because you don't know
Mm-hmm.
it, that's not a big deal. We're dealing with that stuff all the time, especially with Salesforce changing, 3-4 times a year.
Right. Yeah, seriously.
You're not going to know all of it. You just gotta be able to be willing to figure it out.
Yeah, yeah. Great, great, great. This has been so good, man. I just got a few extra questions for you.
Yeah.
So what are the best way that you think that people can succeed during like a phone interview?
Yeah, I mean, so if you don't have the video, right, we're kind of looking for,
Oh,
your
that could be that
names and
initial
things.
interview. Yeah.
But yeah, well, I mean, all of our stuff's online, so it's either phone or video, but just those same things, just have good, concrete answers. Don't be too short. Don't be too long, right? Just give a good, solid, confident answer, right?
Cool.
And if you don't know, then ask some questions. That'd be the other thing too. Is like, don't if they're like, do you have any questions? Don't be like, no, I don't have any questions, because that means
Hmm.
you don't care. Be like, well, how does your company work? Like, when did you found it? Are you the founder? Like that's whatever. What does your benefits look like? How many projects am I going to be on? Who's going to be on my team? Am I alone? Is there anybody there for me to learn from?
Great
Any of those
questions.
things that you're probably already concerned about. Is it actually going to be a good job? Just go ahead and ask those things, right?
Hmm.
Don't leave those things off and just give responses. You get interactive.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Great advice. I love that list of questions. That's also gold. If you're ever wondering what to ask at the end of an interview. You kind of you touched on this a little bit, but like, what do you specifically do for like technical interviews, whether admin or dev side, or what you've seen people do that you think is would be helpful for like someone who's in the interview process to know?
Yeah, so we do a lot of finance math. So I might have somebody kind of look at live figuring out like an equation, and not anything like crazy
Sure.
algorithms, but just like, how do you calculate the number of days and months in between two dates, in Apex, like how would you do that? Or how would you do things like, getting into maps and lists and iterating over that information, things about, asynchronous programming, things like queuables versus futures, which would you pick and why? Well, I mean, would you do batchables? Would you do platform events? Why would you do that, right? And just kind of get into those other scenarios.
Hmm.
Also things like triggers and trigger handlers and understanding trigger handlers and patterns. We want to know that you're not just writing random code. We want to know that you're building building blocks, right? That you're
Yeah.
actually using a framework, that you're creating repeatable, reusable code components. So we have standard test data factories. We have standard sandbox setup scripts. We have all these different standard things. We have standard error logging classes and methods that we use, and we have standard triggers and trigger handling patterns that we use. So it doesn't matter if you use the same pattern as us. It matters that you know the value of using a pattern, right? It matters that you understand why you should do that. It matters that you understand why you shouldn't actually put any business logic in a trigger because you can't write a test to cover it. So, what are you going to do? So just those things where we kind of go through and kind of pick at that. It's hard to do in like an hour, right? It's really hard to make a small enough scenario that's like
totally
live coding. So the other thing too is just have a Git repo that well, that's code you wrote, that if I ask you, you can just pull up and you can show it and you can explain how it works. Why did you do this? Why did you do that? It doesn't have to be perfect code. You can even be like, oh yeah, I don't like this part. It needs to be refactored because of X, Y, and Z. That's life, right? The code doesn't have to be perfect.
Sure.
Be intelligent about it. So just show off your intelligence.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Man, you have given out gold nugget after gold nugget for people in the middle of like this job search, and I think it's going to be super helpful for some people in the community. So if someone wants to work with you, Jim, like where do they find you, man? How do they connect with you? Are you guys hiring right now? So I just want to give your company a little love here.
Yeah, just go to our website, growthheroes.com. You can check us out there. You can probably find me on Discord and other places, but just go to our website and check that out. We do have a About Us. It talks about our culture, talks about our team, and it posts, job descriptions, job openings there if we have them. We are growing right now. We got a lot of work coming in the door, so we're not actively have a job opening right now, but I'm sure we will by the time people watch this. Right.
That's awesome, man. Well, hey, 7 interviews today. This is your 7th one. I cannot believe that. Man, I'm super grateful for your time that you would just give this out for the community. Super helpful stuff, man. So once again, we just appreciate you. Any last things or last advice you would want to say to the community?
Good luck, have fun, keep learning.
Right. Cool, man. Well, thanks so much for your time. All right, it was great chatting with you. All right.